Hello everyone, Megan here today. I'm giving Josh the day off because he works far too hard and he needs a break. So today you have me, lucky you, and we are going to be continuing the series on ancient Mesopotamia, Portrait of a Dead Civilization. This is episode 17. We are making some progress here, and we're going to look at Mesopotamian religion. This is part 3, and we're looking specifically at catering for the divine. So a brief overview of what we're going to be looking at. We're going to consider similarities between the god and the king, the feeding of the god, where this food came from and what it was for, exactly how mealtime works when you're a divine cult statue, and then exactly how the god was thought to consume the food that he was provided with. So, from the 3rd millennium onwards, there was a tendency, Oppenheim argues, to make gods more human. Many people have noted in some of our videos the similarities between Mesopotamian gods and humanity. They throw tantrums, they have love affairs, they form relationships, they can be petulant and kind and cruel. All the variety that we see in human behaviour was understood as being in the behaviour of the divine realm as well. So it only makes sense that human worshippers understood their deities as living much in the same way that they did. And of course, if you're a god, you're not a common person working in the fields. You are imitated by the highest form of human existence, which would be the king. So the god's sanctuary, the temple, was understood as a palace, and in the same way that it was actually quite difficult to gain access to the king, it could be quite difficult to gain access to the god, unless of course you were a priest or a member of the elite. As the king had members of his court and officials to serve him, so too did each god have their own officials in the form of a priesthood who made sure that the temple ran smoothly, looked after the needs of the god, all the kinds of things you would expect to be necessary for an elite-style life. Both god and king relied on others for the basics of existence, including food and clothing, and the gods, in the same way that the king did, received other individuals to their home as a guest. So a king might receive a diplomatic visit from another state, another city. The cult statue received other cult statues, family members, friends who were just visiting from the neighbouring temple. And finally, god and king would go on royal or religious processions around their territory, kind of show their faces, meet the people, and this was an important part of many temple rituals. So where exactly does a god get this food from anyway? Well, food products were brought to the temple both for the god and also for the temple personnel in the form of rations. These people worked in the temple, they kept the books, they performed all the necessary rituals, and they received food rations as part of their compensation. The temple also received food surplus, which was then used to trade for other commodities that were required. The god would receive a morning and an evening meal. This was large enough to feed the god, the king, and all of the temple personnel. It wasn't just enough simply for the god to eat, quote unquote. There was enough food there for everybody. So the mealtime of a god, as you may expect for an entity that is viewed as the supernatural protector of a realm and also the divine counterpart to the king, mealtime was quite a complex affair. A table would be placed before the divine statue. Water was provided before the god so that the god could wash if necessary. Beverages were set out. Cuts of meat served as the main dish, and then fruit was the final course. There would be dinner-time entertainment in the form of music. Then the plates would be cleared and water was provided so that the god could wash up after its meal. Now, obviously, a cult statue is not going to physically consume food. The ancient people were not stupid, they understood this, they didn't try and pretend otherwise. So exactly how did this work? Well, people thought it worked by something called transubstantiation. So the god may not physically consume the food, but it was still sustained by it. Food could also be ritually waved before the deity's eyes so that the god could kind of take whatever sustenance was required without having to physically consume the items of food. This links into what you see in some scholarship as the importance of the gaze of a cult statue. A lot of votive statues that we have from very early in Mesopotamian history have these very wide staring eyes, and there's an understanding among scholars that this is an important feature for the communication of votive statues and the cult statues. Maybe the gaze of the god was thought to bestow a blessing on people, on objects. This isn't an isolated event, deities consuming food through their eyes. This is wrapped up in the importance of visual contact. And finally, the food that the deity ate was thought to have been blessed and was then given to the king to be eaten again. So as the deity's representative on earth, the king had the privilege of consuming this blessed food. In summary, God and king were very closely connected and treated in a very similar manner. Food was provided to the temple by the people and by the state for several purposes, including the consumption by the deity and as food rations for temple personnel. The god's mealtime was a very important event with ritual and performative aspects, and while the god didn't physically consume food, it was still very much understood to be sustained by it. Coming up on Monday, the gods of Mesopotamia. And remember, always ask, how do you know that?